the findings we found for the Cool Call Center this January. And so a little agenda for us is we're going to first walk through our dashboard, walk through the different KPIs we chose to highlight. And then we'll go over our findings from the data and our recommendations of ways that we can improve in following months. And then we will conclude. So hopefully we can make this short and sweet, but very effective. And so first we want to go to our dashboard. And this is what our dashboard looks like for January. And so we highlighted a couple different things. We highlighted the average answer time, the call volume, so the number of calls per day for the whole month. We also highlighted the different ratings for each of the employees, and if their calls were resolved by department, and if the employees' calls were just resolved, period, and how many employees answered. So it's all connected. We can look at specific days and everything will line up to that. Or if we click on specific employees, it'll also show us exactly how they did each day, how they did by each department, which calls they answered. And we can also filter it through these filters up at the top as well, by agent and by department. And so we just felt that these KPIs would be beneficial in helping us to make our Cool Call Center better, that we can help more customers and improve our satisfaction rating. And so next we will talk a little bit about some specific findings that we had.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mackenzie. That dashboard was really helpful in being able to see the different high performers that we had, as well as the low performers. When we look at the department specifically, we notice that the highest department was toasters. And we see in through that dashboard that 85% of all of the calls related to toasters were resolved. And then if we look at the lower performers, that specific department was air conditioners, and that had a 76% resolved rating. That is an indication that maybe air conditioners needs to be focused on a little bit more in the future for training purposes. If we look over at the employees, the high performer was Dan. Now, he is not ranked as the highest rated employee from the customer's perspective. The reason that we chose Dan as the highest performer was due to two things. One, his ranking from the customer, and second, his overall rate of resolving calls. He was rated as the highest employee to be able to resolve whatever call it was that came across his way. 78% of the calls that he took, he was able to resolve. If we look at the lower performer, Becky, she was the second lowest rated employee from the customer. And only 71% of the calls that she took, she was able to resolve. So she wasn't able to resolve as many calls as Dan, and she wasn't also rated as high as from the customer's perspective. One thing that I thought was very interesting that I did not expect to see going over the dashboard was that Martha was the highest rated employee from the customer's perspective, but she was able to answer and resolve the least number of calls. At 69% of the calls that she took, she was able to resolve. This is the lowest out of all of the employees, and I believe that this is an indication that she was simply taking too long on the phone call. I think that meant that she wasn't able to take as many phone calls, but she had very good personable ability to connect with the customer, which allowed the customer to feel like they were receiving better service. But I think that that provides better opportunities and recommendations for the future. Kyle?
Yeah, thanks, Travis. So for recommendations, I think it's important to start with there's obviously a lot of good that's been done. There's a lot of calls, as you can see, through the month that have been resolved, and customers were left feeling happy and satisfied with their experience. But it's important to continue to push further, and there's always room for improvement. What we see is a lot of the departments, they're, as far as being resolved, they rate fairly similarly. But air conditioner definitely is lagging a little behind the rest of them. So what we can take away from that is that there's definitely room for improvement as far as training the employees on how to resolve air conditioner issues, along with the other four, the fridge, television, toaster, and a washing machine. Um, Another thing that we can always push for is the average answer time. That's always important to the customers. There's some employees that their average answer time was obviously lagging behind others, which is pulling behind the group. And we want to close that up just so that customers can kind of expect, no matter who's answering the phone, they're going to wait the same amount of time. The other thing, as far as satisfaction goes, there's kind of a big discrepancy between the top and bottom of employees. So, in talking about what customers can come to expect, we definitely want to put more training towards customer service so that no matter who they call, they can expect they're going to get the same kind of service from whoever they're talking to. Another thing to focus on is for individual employees. Obviously, Martha, we talked about just barely. She's great talking to customers, but her resolution rate is low. And so we definitely want to bump that up. We also have several employees who their, as far as resolve rate, is lower in the lower 70s to high 60 percentile, which means every one out of every four employee or customers is left not having their issue resolved, which is definitely much higher than you'd want to see. You probably want to push that closer to the high 80s, lower 90 percentile. And to improve that, that would definitely be more focused on training with issues that customers are having and how to resolve those issues for the customer. Yeah, I think those are probably the biggest takeaways as far as what we can recommend as far as training goes.
Yeah. And so just to conclude, we want to recognize all the good that we did do, that we did have such high ratings and we were able to take a lot of calls in January. But we want to focus on improving for February, for what's to come, to train our employees on those departments that were struggling and to train them to answer calls and close calls so that we can get a higher resolved rate of calls. And then hopefully we can reevaluate at the end of next month for March. So thank you so much for listening to us and to hear about how the Cool Call Center did this January.